The top 2 ranked questions are both to Helke. So I'm going to ask those first, and then I'm going to come to Elisabeth and to Sue. So Helke, if you can have a go at the top 2 questions there. Will the big data project also address cross-border interactions? And what is the status quo on using mobile positioning data for analyzing mobility in cross-border areas? And that might be fractionally outside of the scope of this project. Anyway, if you could have a go at those 2, and then I'll come to the further questions.
Okay, yeah. So first about the cross-border interactions, how we are going to address those. So even though we have case studies dealing with data sets from mostly from one national context, we are also in one case study looking at the cross-border dimensions that's related to the social network analysis case, and then the hackathon that we organize in January will be more directly related to this challenge of cross-border interactions and what kind of data can be utilized there. So, but definitely that is a challenge that we have faced when we have been trying to think about the content of the case studies, because, for example, we wanted to have a case study where we've utilized social media data, but it's not that simple when you cross borders. For example, there's one company in Finland that has a good database about different social media sources, but it's again a Finnish data set. So definitely there have been challenges there, but the hackathon will address those issues, and we have different data sets there where we are going to see the potentials and challenges. Then there was the question related to mobile positioning data. So maybe I'm not the best person to answer. The Tartu team is an expert in these issues, but definitely we are going to be elaborating on that based on the case study that is mostly focused on Estonia due to the different limitations and legislative environment in different countries, but the case study is basically based in Estonia, but we are going to be then thinking about the possibilities to combine that data with the data in other countries. So yeah, we will address that in the project.
Excellent, thank you very much. I'm next going to come to a question to Sue, which was, if we can get that one up on the screen, can the framework and the outcomes of the MSP LSI be applied in order to enhance cooperation between member and non-EU member states, for example, in the Mediterranean area? That's now the one that's highlighted at the top there. If you could have a go at answering that one. It should go on automatically if the battery is still fine. Carry on talking.
That's better, I think, isn't it? Yeah. Yes, I think there is no reason why the guidelines that we're producing couldn't be applied in any coastal state. I think there's nothing specific in what we are doing that would apply only to Europe, I think. There obviously the directive on this requirement to consider land sea interactions is something that is guiding European member states, but the guidelines are not specific to Europe. So yes, I think they could apply, and I think one of the ambitions is to allow to provide people with some sort of comparable method that would enable them to have conversations across borders. But I think what we're realising, it's come up in several of the conversations, is that obviously the data that we will use to begin to understand land-sea interactions is very country-specific, very place-specific. The guidelines will need to be applied in a sensitive way in every locality. So the answer is yes to that
Right,
question.
okay. Right, excellent, thank you very much. If you can just pass the microphone on to Elisabeth. I've just lost the question, here we go. So, which methodology was applied to measure the impact of material cultural heritage on regional development? Is the question for you?
Yeah. So here we're talking about data collection on different regions where we have different definitions applied. So there were two challenges in applying the methodology. As mentioned in the presentation, the one challenge was how are we going to define when we are going to talk about different definitions per country. So we had to operationalize it as explained in one of the slides. The general methodology was a value chain approach, an approach that talks about creation, sustainable management, dissemination, exhibition, consumption, and also auxiliary activities like ICT, for example, or insurance. So we follow this approach, and there we try to identify the indicators that we could collect in each step of this approach in order to collect the data that is possible to collect at this point.
Right, excellent, thank you very much. Now a question, the third one that's on the screen there, to Jason. Does URRUC apply green infrastructure as complementing a balancing measure and taking that into account? And if not, how can that be done?
Is that working?
Yep.
So first of all, very good question. It's actually surprisingly difficult. We incorporated components of the green economy and components of low carbon vehicles and electric vehicles as well into the actual project itself. But when we met with the stakeholders, they were surprisingly keen on more traditional modes of transport. So we had that discussion with them. Mostly they seemed interested in encouraging people to build more roads. I'm not sure why that was the case. I think it was a field of dreams attitude. But when we spoke to, so our intention was to encourage a number of providers of low carbon vehicle car shares, bike shares to locate in the various areas. When we spoke to them alongside the stakeholders, the immediate response was the population centres are almost too small to set up a viable car share unit, and it would require significant support and subsidies from either regional or national government. And when we spoke to the stakeholders and said, can we put in, say, for example, a bike share scheme to discourage transport, fossil fuel transport and encourage new forms of mobility across the territory, their immediate response was, have you seen how hilly it is? You're not going to cycle a bike up and down those. And we went back to the bike share company and said, can you get electric bikes? And they said, that's 4 times more expensive or 5 times more expensive. So there are significant challenges in incorporating green transport solutions in these particular territories, and we have to be more imaginative about the solutions that we offer. What we're keen to do is encourage greater uptake of public transport and, in the longer term, encourage all stakeholders involved to greenify, that's a word I've just made up, to greenify their own transport systems and encourage more hybrid activity in terms of buses, which are becoming online and more available, but also in terms of vehicles that are moving back and forward from key industrial areas within the territory into the urban centre. So we're also meeting with various transport companies operating within the territory to see what their plans are for the climate change and the economic, the challenges in terms of carbon reduction of their own transport fleets. And I hope that's comprehensive enough answer for you. Thank you.
Right, excellent, thank you very much. There is... Oh,
follow on.
Sorry to interrupt, this was my question, and the answer was interesting, but it was not about green infrastructure, because this is something different. It's a concept of connecting areas, protected and non-protected green areas, Since it's about transport and mobility, the question would be, if you develop new routes of transport, how can the connection between green areas be restored or even made better alongside your project?
So sorry, I slightly misunderstood your question. There are problems with that. For example, in the Delete stakeholders territory, there is a major national park, and if you improve connectivity to the villages that are located around that national park, the immediate impact is tourism increases, maximizing capacity, and so there's a balance that has to be taken. That if you improve transport linkages into these areas, the result is actually going to be it's people outside the territory that are going to benefit. So we are discussing with the stakeholder whether or not they can put in some form of charge or some form of taxation on travellers from outside the area coming in to make use of these amenities, to then use that money to improve that connectivity. So if you're travelling to a national park, you might incur an expense which will then be later on reinvested back into the infrastructure. And considering 7 million people move through the territory on an annual basis, it might provide a reasonable sum of money specifically for those purposes. And again, a part of the Coventry team, one of the members of the Coventry team is giving a look at that and seeing what's available in the literature to recommend to the stakeholders, and I hope that makes sense.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. There is no question directed only to Laurent, but therefore, Laurent, if I could ask you to have a go at the point, the second question there on the screen. Also bear in mind that the question is addressed to me. Thank you very much for having asked that. I believe all the presentations will be uploaded on the ESPON website. Maybe, Laurent, you might know the answer to that one as well, because I don't know the answer to that. So if you could have a go at the top two that are on the screen there, I'd be grateful.
Well, I think the first one's very easy. I think the answer is yes.
Right, good.
So I think absolutely. I think that the answer to the second question is also yes. I think all these projects that we've just heard from now are an opportunity to listen to the local citizens. And I think this also goes for the activities that we will launch in the next 2 months. I think they address key challenges that cities and regions face with the ongoing transformations, whether we're talking about mobility, the environment, demographic changes, economic changes. And of course, this involves the local population and the local citizens. So I think also as ESPON, we see this very much as an opportunity to be in listening mode. So it's, of course, the targeted analyses are designed in a way to serve the stakeholders. So there's always a lead stakeholder and a stakeholder consortium. So it's about them framing their policy challenges. But of course, in the process of coming up with evidence and results and recommendation, it's important to also listen to the local population. So I think the answer is yes.
Right, excellent. Thank you very much indeed. I think that draws that panel to a close. So give them all a warm round of applause. Thank you very much indeed to all of you.